Yeah, yeah. All right, so we're joined this hour by Frank Lara. We're really, really excited to have you here talking with us this hour. And yeah, Frank is an educator. He's a kind of a revolutionary cat, and I'm really, really excited. Kind of each other from the left book, and just I mean, your posts are always fire, and I'm really excited to be talking to you this hour. So let's talk about your educational journey. You're a teacher now, but you've been a teacher for about 10 years out in the mission area. But before that, you had to go and get your degree. So let's talk about how you went to school. What was that like for you, pursuing higher education?
In higher education, yeah. So grew up in Calexico, small town. It's a border. It was always funny because when you leave the valley, Imperial Valley, it was this weird isolated place. You always left and people were like, "Where are you from, Calexico? Is that in Mexico?" Like, I always grew up with that weird notion. And it's also just weird because the more it's these weird border towns, the more educated you become, the more you're expected to detach yourself from being Mexican. My family's like, hardcore I would say nationalist or anything, something of that sort. But they always raised us, and we should work hard, try our best. That we should leave the valley. That's always So I ended up going to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And the funny thing about that was that in 10th grade, I met my school counselor. Oh no, 11th grade? 11th grade, I think. At the end of 10th grade, I met my school counselor. I had no idea what college was. I knew I wasn't supposed to stay home. I knew that I wouldn't be allowed to stay home. And when I left, when I first met the counselor was like, "Oh, look at these grades. Why aren't you in any AP classes? Why aren't you in this and that?" And it's like, I don't know, like I'm just working on. That's all I was told. So thankfully for that counselor, she really pushed us hard to look beyond, it's a beautiful world growing up in the borderlands, but it's a smaller place, and it's important to look outward. So she helped us out and ended up, I don't know, I had some interest in drawing, took some drafting classes, and I thought, hey, I could be an architect. That was really the foundation of thinking before I left, and I applied to several schools, and I got into San Luis Obispo, the architecture school, which, was a complete shock. I had never left the border, and then going there.
So for our audience, just on a scale of 1 to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, how racist is Cal Poly San Luis Obispo?
Man, I'm not gonna lie. I had no idea. I mean, you're talking about un morro, man, morrillo del valle. Like, there was no. Like, I kid you not, we would travel to Ensenada, San Felipe, San Diego. I was there like twice, maybe 3 times. It's only 2 hours away, and no idea of Gringolandia, man. Like, not even like it's in the movies, maybe. And when you go there, you have this impression, right? Because you get sold in the movies, like, oh, I'm really going to know what's up. I'm going to live the Hollywood. I'm going to do this. And then you're just overwhelmed by the whiteness. I'm telling you this now. At the moment, I was just overwhelmed. And I don't know if folks go through this process. I did go through my process. But you kind of get involved in this weird self-hate relation. You're trying to relate yourself to whiteness. But man, homie, like that was rough. Like, and I don't think I ever felt, because I wasn't looking for that I never felt like the overt sort of white supremacy culture that is actually there, because a lot of Aggies come out of there, like white agricultural bros. There was like I know when I left, there was like this situation where there was like nooses, there were weird parties. I mean, super racist stuff. So I never personally encountered that. What I encountered was just the overwhelming environment that was unwelcoming, right? Like, and so that was a lot for me to experience.
So I'm really curious about this. I mean, because it's quite a cultural shock to go from Calexico to up to San Luis Obispo. I mean, I've had a few people on who either lived in or went to school up and down the California coast. So San Luis Obispo, Santa Rosa, Ventura, Santa Barbara. These are all extremely racist places. I mean, they're all extremely racist, very segregated. and the rest of the country doesn't know. The rest of Californians don't even know, to be honest.
No,
So
I
can you talk?
know. I didn't know. Well, I didn't know that. I know that now, but I didn't know that, man. Like the fact that San Luis Obispo was this weird like white hub, and then you had like Santa Maria, which was like, again, messed up terms, man. Like that was where the ghetto was, right? And so like we understood like that, and it's like it just leads you to this weird angst of who you are because you're told, oh, you're at this great institution, the best institution, and then you realize, wait a second, these people don't look like me. Is it really meant for me? It took me the whole career and graduating from there to realize no, it wasn't meant for me. um
Yeah,
but when you're living it, it's something different. I mean, it's terrifying.
yeah. We had Nolan Cabrera on earlier, and I asked him the same question I'm about to ask you. So what was the first time in your lifetime that you were punished for being a smart Mexican?
That's a good question, man. So I'll tell you that I had the privilege of growing up in Calexico in a very sheltered environment
Right.
where I would say like 95% are Mexican, like even Latino, just like even my own ignorance of coming out to the Bay Area and being like, whoa, there's people who look like me that are not from Mexico. So it's been an educational process. So when I left and I got to Cal Poly, I worked as a cook in McDonald's. So I was one of the cashiers, and then I was in the back. Um, was working like 20 hours, and it quickly moved up to like a managerial position. And really, the only reason was because like I'm brown, I could speak English and Spanish, right? Like that was like the skill set. And man, that was an look. You're young, you're told to work hard, you're told to be sort of the happy make it work. And I just remember, you're trying to be a good worker, and just people would come up and say the gnarliest things, man. Like, oh, you speak without an accent. Like, what the fuck does that mean? And like things like that. Or oh, you work here but you go to Cal Poly too. Oh, you know what I mean? Like, didn't that didn't compute with people. And so obviously the subtleties leads you to not really understand who you are, and it takes some time. But that was the journey. It was rough.
Yeah. So can you speak a little bit to what it's like to like it's always it's very interesting. It's this kind of it's not a peculiar or it's not particularly it's not unique to the Mexican experience, the Chicano experience, the idea that you have to leave the small town to go to the big city, and that's not unique. I mean, that you see that in many communities, you see that in many ideas that you leave here to go there, and now you succeed. So you got this idea in your mind that this is what's supposed to be, but then you go there and you find this instead. You find instead this alien. So what was it like emotionally when you walked into that?
Man, that's deep. I mean, the process the process that you go through, this was my process. I don't know how it goes and relates to other people, but it was like you wanted to try, you wanted to prove yourself, right? Like you knew you were in that institution for a reason. I remember there was this white guy. We got along well because we used to ride motorcycles a lot, and he was like, working class white guy. But I remember one time he said, like, we were drinking and he just got really comfortable, and he's like, yeah, man, but like I'm in debt, working class guy, but people of color at the time, I can't remember what he said, but people of color like get in because of the what the hell is that thing called when you get in because of your color?
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action, man. So he's like, because of affirmative action. I was like, and I remember I told him, I was like, I got like a 4.15, like I got a 4.15 and got this SAT score. I was like, I did it. Like, where were you at? And I told him, and he was just kind of blown away. He just couldn't understand, like, oh, also, like, you're competing with, I have to work twice as hard to just be at your level and in the same institution. And I didn't get any help. I didn't get any support. My parents had no idea. I was first generation. And so living that is a lot. And then like I said, you go through the self-hate. I remember at first it was kind of like, oh yes, us Mexicans. And it was always in the negative, man. And it was just like, it wears on you. It's kind of like that water dripping on a rock. Like it just wears slowly. It's just pain. They call it now microaggressions. I saw that term. I was like, oh, that's a trip. But it's that, and it would wear. And then I had a big, I had a lot of luck in applying for a program to study an internship here in San Francisco in 2006. So it was like my 4th year in architecture school. And then shortly thereafter, I got an internship in Germany for 3 months. And I was so consumed by Cal Poly, the Central Coast, that I came to think that was how it is up here, or that's how society, because I had only known the Valley. Now I know this like super backward racist place that defined me in a certain way. And then when I left to San Francisco and then I left to Europe, it just, the privilege of being able to reevaluate oneself blew me away. And then I came back from that self-hate very angry. And so the last year of my schooling, I was mad as hell. I remember that's actually like how I got involved with radical politics, because it was like, damn, you guys lied to me. You guys made me feel like shit. Like I'm having at it, man. And so it was fun. It was fun. Last year, fun.
So can you tell us how did you get involved in radical politics? What was the left turn?
The left turn, like I said, was when you're suddenly, I don't know, in high school you're told the goal is to graduate, is to do the best in that university, be accepted by that institution. And when that institution rejects you, you're kind of like, damn, it's kind of like an identity crisis. So then when I left this area and I was in Germany, I had a chance to go to Paris. I did all the crazy young things that you're supposed to do, indebted myself like crazy, but had a blast. And then I realized, oh, this is just fake. They're making me feel that way. I still am the same person. I still have the same capacity that brought me to this institution, but I'm trying to be accepted. When I came back, there was a class I took, interestingly enough. I don't know if you've interviewed other folks, but you know how you start dabbling in philosophy and sort of that philosophy of bending time. It's like, I think it was like Heidegger at the time, Jean-Paul Sartre, existentialism, the definition of what's real and not real. So I started with that at school, and we started like interpreting reality. Supposedly, this was us at the time. I don't know, but it was big for us because all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is perspective. This is real to some people, and it benefits other people. And so then I started tripping out about that. I was studying for my last for my thesis project in the 5th year of architecture school, and I started. I don't know. I had to pick a topic. So then I was trying to figure out what democracy means, what real democracy means, and I came across like some feminist theory that talked about the other. And obviously that's where like I understood myself to be. What is the other? From that point of view was, patriarchy, the system, the oppression of women. But obviously I understood with the general, like I felt with a general theme of being the other. I was like, wow, this is radical stuff. This is awesome. It exists. And then, just Googling and looking around in the library, anything that was red, came across the Communist Manifesto, and I had no idea. I understood some stuff. I remember telling a professor when we were like the bourgeoisie. It was like, I had no idea bourgeoisie, man. I had no idea. I just knew there's an oppressor. I feel oppressed. What the hell does this mean? So it started there.
Yeah. So now you've got these left politics. Now you're leaving San Luis Obispo. You're leaving with a fancy degree and with some left politics, right? and with a real life lesson, right? So what comes next? Okay, you ready to come out here and then you're starting to become an architect, and somehow you end up being a teacher and involved in in the education industry. So how did that happen?
That's basically it, man. And I didn't expect it to happen either. Mira, my mom always says, papelito en mano, papelito habla. Papelito habla. like to not be messing around. Like this is an institution. The institution needs you to prove yourself that way. It's not your identity, but you need to show that degree. So I was blessed. I was blessed to be able to come out with a degree. Some people think like, oh, I tell them, oh, I went to architecture, and they're like, but you're a teacher, like, so the assumption is I failed or dropped out. No, I graduated, I got the degree, but I was sitting. So we graduated in June of 2008, and I love telling this story because many times we're forced into believing the world, not because I read a book, but because you lived it. You lived this reality, and there's no other way to interpret it. We were sitting in the graduation, first generation. My tias were there, my mom was there. It was like the whole big deal. And the main speaker, I can't remember who it was, but the main speaker said, your class is graduating under the worst economic conditions in modern history at the time. That was a Great Recession, June 2008. I had no idea. I was just like, oh, that's interesting. That's odd. I was able to go to Mexico at the time, spend some time with family, came back, got a job in the Bay in August of 2008. And it was like it was such a privilege. I was so excited. San Francisco, an architecture firm. It was a good firm working for low income housing, public housing. So I felt just good about myself at that time. September, I can't remember, September 20th or something like that. This is the height of the Obama election. Obama versus, who was it at the time? Kerry? No, McCain. I think McCain, if you remember that. So Bush was, an asshole, and everybody wanted him out. And so then there was this momentum around him. But then in September, Bear Stearns collapsed. I remember that. And all of a sudden, it was just like snowfall. Boom, 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 just everything started collapsing. I was the last hired at that firm. And honestly, like, again, going back to what we were talking about before, that we have to be twice as capable to even be where we're at. I managed to survive like 6 layoffs. And because I guess I was the cheapest worker and had a ton of capacity, they kept me on till forever. So September happened. They started laying off people in November, December. And then in March is when the company started to feel the pain. So in March, for the first time, they couldn't pay us a paycheck. We had to go 2 weeks. And they said, look, this is illegal. We can't force you to be here, but this is looking really bad. And at the time, all my friends had been unemployed. Most were not hired. At the time, the architecture firms required you to do 3 months unpaid internships. Cruel. I mean, cruel. They don't even do that now. But at the time, you had to do like 3-6-month unpaid internships to get involved. So then when that happened, I tried to stick around. I tried to help. And then that lasted about 6 months. And it would go like 2 weeks, then a month. Then in September, and the thing was that, like, I was young. I was just getting out of school. So I had debt to pay. I had bills to pay. So having 4 months, I had no savings. So a month of no payment with San Francisco rent, it started getting really bad. So towards the end of September, we were already 6 weeks without getting paid. And they were suggesting that if we go in unemployment, we can at least get unemployment. So that's how I transitioned out. And I was already starting to volunteer at some schools. I was already getting involved with political work here in San Francisco. And so it was a transition I didn't really think about. I just knew I had to do something, and I just didn't look back. So I went to SF State. I applied to SF State. I passed all the tests right away, and then got accepted to the credential program and never looked back.
Yeah. So, mentioned a generational thing. Like entering into the workforce at a certain point in time, and I can think of my own experience with work. And I remember when I was a kid, there was still something called an industrial economy, but it was on the way out. Right when I was a child, it was dying. And by the time I entered into the workforce, I'm told the industrial economy is dead, and what we need to prepare now for is for a service economy. And that said, prepare to have 7 jobs. Right, that's what they tell me. And so then I'm into my career as a service economy, and I'm told somewhere in the middle of the service economy is dead. We now have the gig economy, right? So like, what do you have a similar experience, and what's going to follow the gig economy? The scrounge economy?
That's a universal basic income, man. I'll tell you. You're just gonna have money and not even know that's in other countries that's just inflation when you have all this cash and you don't know what to do with it because you can't purchase stuff. But it's
Yeah.
odd. It's odd. This country is odd. Um, that's a good thing. Again, like I consider myself lucky that I was able to get out of that situation and find a job, one of the last remaining union protected jobs. It's there has many contradictions. Obviously, the idealized view is education's so great and our children, which is true, but it's also part of the institution and can be very cruel to particularly our Chicano little ones who are growing up, right? So that what has been my experience in the organizing, community organizing, and all the other political work. You do encounter people and encounter the realities where they, God, there was people for our raza, they're used to 2-3 jobs, right? They've been set in the position of the economy. Like now they say these essential workers, right? Thank you, whatever. You have created an entire workforce that you're never going to grant them rights. You're never going to give them privileges because that's the level needed in order to actually make profit at this point in time. So for them, having seen that lifestyle, I knew that for many folks that was the restaurants, like you said, the service, the retail, and now with the gig situation, it's always a thing to just talk to the drivers who do 12-hour shifts, 2, 3 12-hour shifts. They come from, like here in the Bay Area, folks come from Sacramento, they come from Tracy, they come from Modesto. I mean, we're talking about 3 hours, 4 hours. They would come. This was prior to the crash. That's why we shouldn't think that this COVID-19 is the reason why capitalism is failing. Everything was on a thin line, and it just needed a little bit to push it over. It was a little tip. So you had the gig workers coming on the weekend. So they would come Thursday. They would sleep in their car. This was in their car. So they would sleep, and they would work Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I think you could only allowed legally to work like 3 or 4 days in a row in 12-hour shifts. 12, 13-hour shifts, 14-hour shifts, pass out, and then go at it again. And that's how they were making money to try and sustain a livable condition back in Tracy, back in Modesto, back in these places where you were still in an apartment. You weren't like owning a home or something like that. But so my experience hasn't been myself personally, and the people, like my family is a different story, right? Like my sister who's tried to get one of my sisters, my other sister's trying to get an education too, which I recommended to her. But one of my sisters just struggling with like healthcare, trying to get her degree. But again, going back to my mom, sin papelito, no, como, how? Like, I mean, people, when after the crash, people with bachelor's, master's degree working at Starbucks, managers at Starbucks. I mean, that was the qualification. That's nuts. It's nuts.
Yeah. Definitely that's wild. So we're talking about the fact that that there's kind of this idea of this a constant introduction of this new economy. You're talking about these conditions that these gig workers follow. But I always think about like what they tell, what the way they try to train you, the things they try to tell you, like, okay, in order to get ahead, you must do this, right? In order to get ahead, you must do that. And so it's just wild though, because you think about like in the old, kind of industrial economy, right? During the height of what was called Fordism, when people could like get a job, they get right out of high school, you get a decent job, you could like get one income household, you could go on vacation, all kind of like that. And you didn't really need to go through all these hoops. It was work, it was hard, it was proletariat. I mean, I'm not trying to say it wasn't anything, but we find ourselves in this kind of situation with this new economy, and when you look at the statistics, what they tell you is you need to learn like computer skills, and this is what they tell you, right? You need to learn computer skills. But at the same time, if you look at General Motors, at the height of General Motors, Ford, whatever, they were employing hundreds of thousands of people, a million people, this, that, the other, right? Facebook has about 5,000 engineers. Google has about 10,000. Twitter has about 4,000. eHarmony has more questions of compatibility than employees. right? So like that's kind of like
Wow.
there's no way that this new economy is you're gonna it can't replace it cannot replace the industrial economy. So what does that leave for whole generations of workers? Where does that leave them? What position?
Man, you raised that like so well, and it's so tragic. I don't know. It is a question. I think we're finding out the answer to that. I think that's what this has been. That's what 2008 was. That's what 2000, what are we, 20 is. It's capitalism just dumping the excess and reinventing itself. And I say that in the worst terms for us workers, because in the 2008 people tried to build wealth with housing, construction workers. I think for Latinos was like crazy. Like wealth had gone up like 30-40% and then just completely obliterated because they were all based off those weird creepy loans that the banks ended up getting bailed out. So I think you're on to what we're saying, is that this is new. This is a new moment in capitalism, and it's ugly, and it's not meant to employ us. Like, I'll tell you this: my wife's Iranian, and we hang out with a lot of her folks, and it's beautiful people. But what stuns me is that in that circle, there are many first generation immigrants who are coming fully prepared from Iran. Because as much as this country loves to hate on Iran, Iran has one of the best engineering, produces one of the best engineers in the world. So when they come, they get immediately hired by Google, Facebook, and it's always a trip to talk to them because they all work in this different companies and they all have the similar lifestyle. So on top of what you said with the 5,000 workers who are being hired, those aren't people from us, man. Those aren't our jobs. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
We're not being brought in like that. I'm lucky that I went to a school that I got my credential and became a teacher, but this isn't meant for us. You're not going into engineering school and going through all the different steps in order to be hired by Facebook. It's wild. This isn't meant for us. And it's also a change for the entire working class, because there aren't enough jobs. What is it now? What they're saying is that there's going to be double digit, they expect up until 2022, double digit unemployment. In the last 10 years, I think it's varied between 5 and 3%. And we knew they were all shit jobs. And we also knew that a bunch of people had like stopped looking for work. But imagine it's expected double digit unemployment. And of course we also know the trends, like why did mass incarceration develop? Because you gotta prison people. You don't got jobs for them. You took everything in the industrial Midwest, in the Rust Belt. You took all those jobs in the cities. You also had here in the Bay Area, you had massive, massive construction companies that helped build up this war machine, and then you took it away. So obviously you instill poverty, and then it's kind of what the history of how capitalism came to be in England, right? So in England, they needed the land in order to start grazing the sheep to have the wool. So the first, I think it's like 100 years of capitalist development and accumulating capital. When they put everybody in poverty, you had the Charles Dickens stories. You had those crazy stories around prostitution, the massive diseases, pandemics. Like, because at the same time, capitalism was readjusting to a new lifestyle that farm workers could not, or farm owners could no longer produce with their hand. So you had a transition period of about 100 years of misery and destitute. I think we're like living that moment. It's not gonna be 100 years, hopefully, if people get pissed off enough. But that's our transition right now.
Yeah. Well, the prison rate went up from I think in the late 70s or something around, it was hovering around like 300, 400,000 up to over 2 million. But at that same time period, personal debt skyrocketed around the same rate. The cost of education skyrocketed around the same rate. So I mean, we see these situations where, I mean, these are kind of personal. Why do we take on personal debt? Well, it's because we can't afford to live, right? And you see all these different things skyrocketing at the same rate. Homelessness skyrockets pretty much like at that. I think there's 7 times more homeless today than there was then. So like I don't remember the exact numbers, but you see all these numbers of prison, homelessness, debt, all these things skyrocket simultaneously since like the late 70s. And I mean, this is the world we're born into.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it seems to be getting categorically worse. If you're born in 80, like let's say you're born in 1980, it's bad. You're born in 1990, it's worse. You're born 2000, you're really fucked. I mean, like that's it's all headed in one direction. I mean, you can look at all these studies. Everyone always compares everyone was always comparing the baby boomers to millennials. But what's lost in the middle of that is Gen X, and Gen X actually has a lower standard of living than the boomers, but slightly higher than the millennials. But this is also the reason I bring this up is not a generational divide thing, but the reason I bring it up is because it's a scale. We could see something happening. We see an industrial collapse. So whatever follows, what are we on now? Gen Z or whatever, it's going to be even worse. It's not until something happens, we're not going to be able to turn this thing around. I mean, I personally would tie a lot of this to automation, the fact that the industrial economy is being completely gutted by machines that make machines. And so what is necessary for us, like in the next generation, not to die?
Man, I think that's an answer we're going to have to collectively come up with. I do agree with you in automation. I was reading this book by James Lee Boggs, The American Revolution. And at the time, he was talking about automation, and this was like in the 60s. So I was like, damn, this guy was analyzing this. And I've heard of other books too talk about automation, and really the lowering of the minimum wage, the lowering of benefits, the lowering of standards was just in preparation for us to just like have nothing, because we there's no profitability for human labor. You just do it to automation. There was also what's that movie called? American Factory. I don't know if you had a chance to see American Factory. It's on Netflix. But if you have a chance to see it, it's wild. I mean, like this old factory that existed in Ohio, I think. Chinese investment came, brought in Chinese workers, and these workers in China, what's happening. It's just so radical. But the work conditions are really rough. They ended up showing the story of just how Chinese workers work, and then at the end of the film and compared it to like American workers, and it's kind of sad. I mean, the expectations of lifestyle where these Chinese workers were expected to just like commit themselves to this job and have 12-hour days and just work through it, and sort of this aging American workforce doesn't know how to work, doesn't have a high standard, and it didn't blame the workers. What it ended up doing was talking about how this is what the capitalists do. They just overwork us, and when they don't need us, they toss us. So at the end of the movie, they have automation. The machines pretty much replaced everybody. So when you raise what's going to happen in that book, what they were telling is that we have to reimagine a society that isn't just about work. I mean, our families talk that way. Mi mamá, that's how she says, hay que trabajar, puro trabajo, mijo, siempre a trabajar. And it's true. But what is going to be the purpose of work? Is it really to be super exploited? Is it just to get a wage? Or is it really going to be to finally improve the quality of living of society? And by that, I mean, instead of, for education, it's a little different because you actually have to be there with children and be like, but as an educator, you could see education being some of the day is managed by myself as an educator, but the other half of the day is managed more by people, and there's taking them outside in smaller classrooms, thinking, having more philosophy discussions, helping them in the areas of need so that the whole child is benefited, so that we then have massive infrastructure and social welfare programs and volunteers to feed people communally, to teach people different skill sets, to have overflowed community centers with 24 hours of service, to support our senior citizens and house them, to finally be engaged. So let's say they pay you now 2 hours every week to suddenly participate in your city and local government and enhance democracy, right? So that part of our work is actually improving society, not the profit motive. I think that would be an imagination. There's also, like in Germany, you started seeing some of the unions fighting for a 28-hour work week. So imagine we would work less and get the same pay. It's not to say that you don't work. It's just that, I mean, I think we reached what we're seeing with this crisis is how interconnected and how super advanced society was in producing meaningless crap and meaningless culture. And you just had to dig your head in and work, 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 and not stop and think, what the hell are we doing? Now we're stopped. And you think, oh, damn, this society still produces things. Food is still coming in. Of course, talking about our undocumented workers, lifting their level of standard, their level of dignity, giving full rights. But right now, capitalism and the empire is being sustained pretty much by the super, super exploited. And we don't know what that is. But if we were to dream of a new society, it would be a society where, you know, we can finally try and live in dignity and fulfill. It's always been that, right? Che Guevara said, the new society, the new man, the new person. Everybody's always said that you're going from this society, we're going to have to envision new type of people who just want to live and build community and be truly social beings the way our native families, our native siblings, sisters and brothers lived for many years. They worked and were one with nature, talking about climate change. I mean, you can't keep producing this stuff.
Yeah.
That's bad.
So let's say we transition from the way we produce things now to an even higher rate of technology, even higher rate of automation, even fewer hands necessary. If we go with the old UBI model, or we go with this new UBI model that's being promoted, environmental collapse will still happen. We'll still have. I mean, essentially, we'll be given money to give to people that own things, right? We'll be given. It's a way of like protecting the market. It's a way of having a market system without actually having capitalism. It's without having the old industrial era capitalism where you're a worker and a consumer and profit is in value. It's like it's a valueless market, right? Um, um, but if we instead seize the means of production, then that's a different story. So what would be the difference between universal basic income and seizing the means?
Man, that's the question. I don't know. Listen, like even for myself in the UBI model or whatever, like it sounds nice, but it's mostly like a bailout for rent, right? I mean, you're just seeing financial capital, particularly in the mortgage and real estate, buy up land, and the massive inflation of that, massive inflation of rent. And then you're saying, well, all we're going to do is give you money, less work, but more money to basically hand it over to the same people. So isn't that just going to go up and make it your wage kind of irrelevant? That would be my thinking. Like you said, it's a temporary measure. And then the other thing too is kind of like our labor is in relation to capitalism. It's the revolution. It's a revolutionary component. The fact that we as workers have to relate to capitalism by being super exploited, but at the same time, the opposite of that is that we can shut it down and prevent it from functioning, or as you said, seize it and then produce it for our benefit. If you remove that and you just have a paycheck, I mean, I don't know if you had family. I've had family being on social services, welfare. Man, it drains you. It drains you because you're just getting one check, and like as soon as you try and look for a better life or trying to improve, they cut you off. You feel bad. Like there's no sense of self and dignity because you're just kind of expecting this money, but you're afraid to explore. You're afraid to develop because all of a sudden that costs money, that takes risk, and they can cut you off. And then it becomes also a political tool by the state in that, hey, I don't like your opinion. I don't like what you're saying. I don't like what you're doing. I'm going to cut you off, right? It's another sense of control. Like myself as an educator, the thing that I love the most about, I'm not part of a nonprofit. I participate in other organizations. They're all volunteer organizations. But the reason I like my teaching position is that I don't have, first of all, my principal is my boss. But like if I do a good job, nobody comes to tell me, nobody comes to boss me around. Nobody comes to threaten to take over my paycheck. I'm part of a union. So my politics are independent. I have a chance to say what I want. I have a chance to build the type of work that I want. If I'm handed something, that person has control over what I'm saying. So I wonder, I don't know, but that's what I think about the UBI situation in terms of the seizing the means of production. I wonder what that would look like for the US. I wonder, would it look like seizing financial capital, nationalizing banks? Because like for a lot of the revolutions, Cuba, Nicaragua, you seize U.S. companies that owned land. A lot of Latin American revolutions, when they talked about seizing sort of means of production, was seizing the land, and working it, because the land was usually owned by the wealthy, and you couldn't work it. So in the U.S., I'm assuming there's debates about this, but in the U.S., the land's already massively privatized and socialized in a way, because it's like the big corporations have relationships to the government protects it. So how would we seize that? Is it really seizing the land, or is it seizing just what produces the wealth? I could just see, I see banks like that. For me in the US, I see banks. So what does it mean in suddenly seizing the banks, nationalizing the banks? Right?
Yeah. So we're in this crisis, right? We're in this crisis. So, and we see that in China, they're able to build a hospital in 10 days. We've seen situations where in Cuba, a hurricane hits and they're able to clear it out, right? Yet in the United States of America, we have a situation where we're hit by hurricanes and people are going to die. We're hit by a pandemic, and we see veterinarians donating ventilators. We see tattoo artists donating gloves. We see parish priests going into the tombs to find these medical masks. I mean, these are all stories that happened. We see the president telling us
in the richest country, in the richest country.
Yeah. So why is it that a market system that we have can't produce the goods and necessaries during a health pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is something we always present, right? It's because it's always about profit, and everybody's talked about it. It's like it wasn't profitable for them to maintain ventilators because, first of all, it's not profitable to produce them. You don't sell them at a massive profitable rate, and then they end up being in a warehouse that you have to pay then real estate and lose money in order to hold them. So it's not profitable in that sense. Again, mask, unless the moment right now requires millions of them. But before that, they sit on shelves. It wasn't like much of a requirement. So you produce just enough. It wasn't, and you're not going to in a market system, and particularly this type of market system. It's not just the issue of capitalism. We have neoliberalism, and also the fact that we have an ideological government that is super right wing and is super, borderline fascist. So it doesn't even want to try to meet the needs of people. Like, this is not the same like in France, for example. France, capitalist government as well, but they fear the people, and they had the yellow vest protest that literally was burning the streets, and they were terrified. The government was terrified of the workers. So then, even within capitalism, there's sort of like accommodations that are occurring, but
there's levels to this shit.
There's levels of that shit. It's still shit, but damn, there's some multicolored stuff. No, man, but listen, one thing you were saying about China and Cuba, people get all bent out of shape about trying to analyze those governments and situations. And the one thing that I find an opportunity for us to really, really break through sort of our colonized mentality, are the BS that we see, Americanism that embeds in our head. It's just, can you appreciate another country doing things better than this country? Like, that's just my thing. There's so much, the way American exceptionalism is sold on people. You can't even acknowledge that this formerly both Cuba, China, many countries. Like, when I went to Iran, I had the privilege of going to Iran. It blew my mind. It's the same way when I went to Mexico City, blew my mind at how colonized my own thinking is, that I can't even see advancement. Like, Asian countries in Singapore, Hong Kong, I mean, the countries are amazing. That's the future. And even if you want to, I don't believe in this, but let's say you wanted to compete in that. Let's say you wanted to believe that your future should somehow compete in that level. I don't agree with that. But let's say even if you wanted to, damn, you are ignorant to not even see that the world has left you behind. And I don't want to be an ignorant person, right? And
That's
we
called
should.
hating.
What's up?
That's called hating. No, seriously, when you can't, when you see someone else do something well and you're like, nah, and like like if you want to, like, no, seriously, that's the worst thing. If you want to be competitive, is to be a hater, because you're like, nah, no, and you start making excuses, you start lying to yourself. I mean, no, man, that's hating.
Instead of offering an alternative, right?
Right,
Like
right, right, right.
if you're busy, you don't got time to hate.
Yeah, I mean, but even if you want to compete, you don't have time to hate. You never have time to hate. If you want to collaborate, no time to hate. If you want to compete, no time to hate. The time to hate is never. It's like lying, it's just like it's a nation of haters.
Nation of haters, man. Wow.
United,
They
United
want
Hate of America.
haters of America, man. Make America hate again. Make America hate again. No, man, but like us as raza,
Yeah,
we have no benefit in that. That's some gringolandia stuff. That's some stuff that we cannot instill in our kids. Like, even if you don't agree with our politics, even if you don't agree with me and my like anti-capitalist views, whatever, even for me, you're going to tell me that our children who are bilingual, bicultural, whose family and legacy is so diverse and worldly, that we should then funnel our same kids into American exceptionalism?
yeah,
We ain't
yeah.
part of that. I
Right.
think it's tragic. I think that's tragic.
That's tragic too. But there's an additional thing on top of that though, because I think that independent of the gringos, and maybe as a result of the Spanish conquest, some of that workerism runs deep in our families, our culture. It runs deep. This idea that you have to work, you have to work, you have to be productive. You must. I mean, even if you're not getting paid, go volunteer. Do not just sit there, right? That runs deep. That runs deep. That runs deep. And it's. I'm not sure that serves us either.
I think, like, well, I've seen you chat with a lot of our, LA has some beautiful people. I didn't know that. Like, for me growing up, Chicanos, I'm telling you, my parents are a trip. But Chicanos would be like, eso los primos en Los Angeles. Like, that's what Chicanos. It's like cholos Chicanos are like, no, mom, that's not how that works. We've been working through that. But the legacy of Chicanos who understood the values of cultura, comunidad, unidad, like those were like, I meet some of those folks and I see you talk to them too. I haven't had the privilege of collaborating with many here in the Bay Area, but when they talked about work for our community, they took that ethic of like las manos en el campo suddenly to build our community, to that same metaphor of lifting us, of culturing us, right? That's future. That's what we're talking about when we say what's the future of our people. It's that.
Yeah, it's funny to me though, because I'm trying to critique it, but at the same time, I got a comment section here that says Ben Candina says you got to produce. You're talking like, yeah, we got to take our hands, we got to do this. I mean, like, I'm full of shit. I've done like 90 interviews in 10 days, so I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Hey man, we need to calm down. We need to.
Pero estás produciendo ideas. You're producing thought and beauty, and it's our voice. That we're not saying no seas flojo. Like, hell no seas flojo. I'm telling you, like, me and my wife talk about this all the time. Like, inshallah, we have a child or something, like, and we feel bad for that kid because we're gonna make that kid work. No, I as a teacher, I make my kids work, man. No les digo de volada, todo mundo rapidito. Like, I don't mess with that. I'm just saying, work for our liberation. Don't work for the boss.
Exactly. Work at least half hard as that as you do for some bullshit. I mean, it's not even like working for the boss. It's just working for like I mean, it's nonsense.
It's the work, man. You're like, damn.
Yeah, work. But Oh man, so we've been joined this hour by Frank Lara. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. So can you tell our audience like where they can they follow you? What are you up to next? What do you got going?
Thanks, brother. Thanks. I mean, gracias de nuevo for your time, for your efforts, for recording all these interviews. If we can't do that for ourselves, nobody's gonna want to hear this. And I appreciate you. I appreciate your book. Just like give a shout out, right? Love it. Threw me fire. Loved it. I needed it. And told you. You saw. You. I just told you my story about that. How I felt at that time. So it's nice to be able to talk to you. Um, but for us, it's a matter of connecting, right? Like I'm on Facebook a lot. I'm active here in my union. I'm active here in the mission. I'm active here with a lot of folks. I'm also involved in the Party for Socialism and Liberation, in the Answer Coalition, in Latin American Teachers Association. I mean, it's un desmadre. And it's just the goal is to build as many connections and as many relationships because revolution is a very deep transformational process. And if we can't, and how do we expect that transformational process to last and really be deep if we can't even have these type of interactions and connections as people? So I post a lot of stuff on Facebook. People can follow there. But I always tell people like trabajo hay, como te digo, estamos diciendo, a trabajo hay. Si quieres trabajar, hey, I'll show you where to work and de volada, let's get going. Pero mucha gente, they have to go through their process and they have to come to their own realization that this doesn't work for them. And let's connect, let's talk about that and how to get it going. But at one day, at some point, you have to do something. Like, I don't think the issue is not having enough information. We have enough information. We have videos about it. We have books about it. We have produced great thinkers like yourself and writers like yourself who already, ya sabemos cómo está la cosa. The problem is that we're not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So we have to really commit ourselves to that struggle. I'm not telling you that like it's going to be easy. I'm not telling you but you have to drop that Netflix, drop that PS4, you have to drop that movie, you have to drop that, that lifestyle that it's always pura fiesta, fiesta, fuera, 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 like, because that's also part of the problem. That's also part of capitalism. It involves you that you think you have to do these things. And sometimes you need to pause and figure out what the hell are we doing? Like, how are we going to work together? So that would be my closing.
Well, I appreciate you, Frank, and we will reconvene soon.
Gracias, hermano. Gracias.
All right, brother.